What if the world wasn't as rational as you thought? What if, beneath every conversation, behind every purchase, within every decision you've ever made, there was an invisible current tugging at your mind? Influence is not a skill reserved for politicians or marketers. It is the undercurrent of life. The gentle pull behind why we say yes when we want to say no, or why we trust certain people immediately while feeling uneasy around others for reasons we can't explain. Influence doesn't announce itself. It simply is. Subtle, quiet, and endlessly powerful. And yet, most people never learn to see it. They walk into rooms unaware of how they are being sized up. They scroll through feeds, their beliefs slowly shaped by patterns and repetition. They argue with logic in a game that is played with emotion. The truth is, if you don't master influence, you're at the mercy of those who have. But here's the invitation: to step into awareness, to understand what has been working on you so you can begin to work with it, and eventually master it. Not to manipulate, but to move with intention. Not to control others, but to free yourself from unconscious control. This is not a manual for deception. It's a mirror, one that shows you how much power you've always had and what's possible when you stop surrendering it. Wherever you are, however you're listening, pause for a moment. Look around. What time is it for you right now? Where are you? Let that awareness anchor you. Then ask, how often have I made a decision and not fully known why? Now, imagine being able to walk into a conversation and feel the current instead of being swept away by it. Imagine sensing what moves people and how you can move with it. That's what influence truly is. It's not a tool of dominance. It's the quiet art of resonance. The capacity to reach under words and into minds, to align with someone's psychology so deeply that what you propose feels like their idea. This is what those who master the game know, and what most others will never see. We are constantly influenced by forces we don't name. Advertisements that tap into urgency, stories that sneak past our defenses. Even the way a question is phrased can determine the answer. Influence is everywhere, but we rarely stop to ask, what if I could influence back? From here on, we begin a journey, not of power over others, but of power over how we show up, how we speak, how we understand the human mind. It begins with a choice, to no longer drift, but to become deliberate. And the first step in that journey is to understand the true nature of the mind you're working with. The mind is not a logic processor. It is a story weaver, a bias machine, an emotion sponge. It is shaped not by data, but by meaning. It does not ask, what is true, but what feels familiar, and what fits with who I think I am. So when you try to influence someone using pure logic, you're speaking in the wrong language. You're playing chess in a game of music. Think about how many times you've agreed with someone because of how they made you feel, not because their argument was stronger. Or how often you've made a purchase not from need, but from impulse. These aren't failures of intelligence. They're just signs that your brain is working exactly the way it was designed to. Emotionally, subconsciously, and socially. True masters of influence don't argue harder. They attune better. They read emotion before they speak. They sense resistance before it shows. They know that the most powerful persuasion doesn't look like convincing. It feels like truth. When someone says yes before they know why, it's not because they were outwitted. It's because they were understood. You don't need to be charismatic, aggressive, or even outspoken to be powerful. You just need to learn how people work. Influence is not about overpowering. It's about alignment. The most powerful voices are often the quietest, the ones who guide without pressure, the ones who ask the right question at the right time and shift the whole conversation. This journey ahead is not just about tactics, it's about seeing. It's about noticing what others miss, how a tone of voice carries more weight than a fact, how posture betrays more truth than a speech, how silence can say more than persuasion ever will. By the end of this path, you won't just understand how influence works. You'll recognize it in every interaction. You'll begin to see patterns, not noise. You'll hear what people mean, not just what they say. You'll feel the weight of your words before you speak them. And most importantly, you'll know how to shape your presence so others feel seen, understood, and moved. The real question is, are you ready to stop being influenced blindly and start playing the game consciously? Because that's exactly where we're headed next. Deep into the human mind, the core operating system of influence itself. Not the mind we wish we had, logical, rational, objective, but the real one. The one shaped by emotion, memory, instinct, and culture. The one that drives decisions in the shadows. Let's step into that now. The mind is not a blank canvas, nor is it a pristine calculator running pure logic. It is a storm of associations, fragments of memory, and embedded meaning layered over time. Every thought you have is built upon invisible roots. And those roots, whether you're aware of them or not, shape the world you see and the decisions you make. If you've ever found yourself reacting before you even understood why, welcome to the subconscious. This vast, silent operating system governs over 90% of our daily thoughts and behaviors. It decides what feels safe, what feels true, and what demands action. You didn't vote for these rules. They were installed through experience, culture, trauma, repetition. That's why mastering influence isn't about shouting louder. It's about speaking the language the subconscious already understands. You can't persuade what you don't understand. And you can't understand behavior without first honoring how the human mind is wired. Let's start with heuristics, mental shortcuts. The brain is designed for survival, not perfection. It doesn't analyze every detail of every situation. It looks for quick, intuitive judgments that have worked before. That's why we stereotype, why we assume, why we leap to conclusions. These shortcuts are often efficient, but they come at a price. They make us susceptible to influence. When a salesperson shows you a product marked was $9,999 now only $299, your brain doesn't calculate objective value. It reacts to the contrast, the anchor. It feels like a deal. That sensation is real, but it has nothing to do with whether the product is worth it. It has everything to do with how your mind frames context. And then there's priming, the subtle art of planting associations before you even know they're there. If I asked you to think of the word cold and then showed you an image of a man with his arms crossed and no smile, you'd probably judge him as distant or unfriendly. But if you had just been primed with the word warm, your entire interpretation of the same photo might shift. That's how fragile perception is. That's how deep the subconscious runs. Now consider how emotions bypass logic entirely. If someone triggers fear in you, genuine fear, your rational mind takes a back seat. That's not weakness, that's biology. The limbic system hijacks your ability to analyze, and suddenly, you're scanning for safety, not truth. The best influencers know this. That's why fear, urgency, and even flattery are such effective tools. Not because they are true, but because they feel true in the moment. But what if we could flip this? What if, instead of being shaped unconsciously, we began to reshape the input? To rewire the stimuli? This isn't just a fantasy. It's the basis of how habits are formed, how beliefs are changed, and how transformation begins. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, is real, and influence is the chisel. When you speak to someone's subconscious, you speak to the part of them that acts without asking. That's where real influence happens. Not in arguments, not in debates, but in emotional resonance. It's in how you make someone feel, because the feeling drives the thought, and the thought justifies the decision afterward. You've probably seen this in relationships. Someone stays with a partner who treats them poorly. Outsiders think it's irrational, but the subconscious is tethered to something deeper: a fear of abandonment, an identity wound, a pattern from childhood. Until those roots are addressed, logic has no chance. That's why, when it comes to persuasion, logic is the slow horse in the race. Emotion, pattern, and identity always sprint ahead. So what does this mean for influence? It means the smartest person in the room doesn't always win. The most factual message doesn't always stick. The best product doesn't always sell. What matters is how it feels, how it fits the internal story someone's already living. Influence is about becoming the mirror to that story, so accurate and emotionally aligned that the person feels they've found truth, when in fact, you've simply understood them better than they've understood themselves. Think about politicians. They rarely speak in data. They speak in narrative, in identity. They tell stories that resonate with voters' values, fears, and aspirations. That's not because they're better storytellers. It's because they're speaking directly to the subconscious. Now apply that to daily life, to your conversations, your leadership, your relationships. When you understand that people respond to what feels familiar, what feels safe, and what feels empowering, you begin to see influence not as something you do to others, but something you align with inside them. Here's the deeper truth. People don't resist influence. They resist manipulation, but they are drawn powerfully to those who make them feel seen, safe, and certain. If you can provide that consistently, ethically, without pressure, you become magnetic. And magnetism is influence without effort. Let's end this section with a small but potent question. When was the last time someone changed your mind without asking you to? That's the path we're walking now. Learning not how to pressure, but how to position. Not how to fight resistance, but how to bypass it entirely by speaking to the subconscious architecture of the human mind. Which brings us naturally to the next layer of the game. How our built-in biases distort the way we see reality, and how those same distortions can become tools of extraordinary persuasion. Biases are not flaws in the mind. They are features, adaptive shortcuts carved by evolution to help us survive. But in the modern world, where complexity outweighs danger, these shortcuts often mislead us. And when it comes to influence, they are not just blind spots. They are open doors. Doors through which persuasive messages walk without resistance. If you learn to see these doors, you don't need to push. You only need to knock in the right rhythm. Let's begin with the most pervasive of them all: confirmation bias. The tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms what we already believe. It feels like truth. But it's really protection. Protection of identity, of belonging, of mental equilibrium. When someone holds a belief, they will unconsciously filter out anything that challenges it and cling to anything that supports it. This is why debates rarely change minds. Facts are dismissed if they threaten one's self-image. Even scientific evidence can be denied if it contradicts a core belief. But a skilled influencer doesn't argue. They frame their message in a way that aligns with the listener's pre-existing worldview. They speak within the belief system, not against it. For example, imagine trying to persuade someone who values freedom above all else to wear a seatbelt. If you argue from safety, they may resist. But if you say, wearing a seatbelt gives you control, it ensures you can walk away on your own terms, you're aligning safety with autonomy. You've framed your message not to challenge identity, but to reinforce it. Then there's the anchoring effect. The mind fixates on the first piece of information it receives and uses it as a benchmark for all that follows. This is why high-priced items are shown first in stores, to make everything else feel like a bargain. It's why a negotiation often hinges on who speaks first. The first number sets the psychological frame. Anchoring works because the brain is lazy. It doesn't want to work harder than necessary. So it grabs onto the first thing available and builds a story around it. That's not irrational. It's efficient. And influence respects efficiency. Now consider the availability heuristic. This is the mind's habit of overestimating the importance of information that is readily available or emotionally charged. If we hear about a plane crash, we suddenly feel flying is unsafe, even if statistics haven't changed. If we see news about a rare disease, it feels more threatening than heart disease, which kills far more people silently every day. This bias can be used ethically to increase awareness, or unethically to incite fear. The difference lies in intention. But either way, the mechanism is the same. What we see often feels more true than what we don't. Another potent bias is the halo effect. When we perceive one positive quality in someone, like attractiveness or confidence, we tend to assume they possess other unrelated positive traits, like intelligence or kindness. A person who speaks with eloquence is assumed to be smart. A brand with sleek packaging is assumed to deliver quality. This is why first impressions are so crucial. They color every interaction that follows. That's also why influencers, leaders, and even cult figures put enormous effort into their image. It becomes the lens through which all their behavior is interpreted. And yet perhaps the most emotionally potent bias is loss aversion. Studies show people are more motivated to avoid loss than to gain equivalent reward. Losing $100 feels worse than gaining $100 feels good. This is primal. Pain commands more attention than pleasure. Because evolutionarily, pain often meant death. This is why scarcity works. Why countdown timers drive action. Why only 3 left in stock feels more urgent than great value. People are wired to move faster to avoid losing than to gain something new. And that urgency bypasses rational delay. Now imagine stacking these biases together. You present a high anchor price, then a limited time offer. You add glowing reviews from verified customers and a message aligned with the user's values. You are no longer persuading. You are orchestrating a decision that feels effortless to the other person, because every part of the message flows with their psychology, not against it. This is what master influencers understand. People are not irrational. They are predictably emotional. They follow patterns not because they're foolish, but because they're human. So the goal is not to outsmart them. It's to speak fluently in the language of their patterns. And this is where many go wrong. They try to beat logic with logic. They argue louder, longer, harsher. But emotion wins not because it's stronger, but because it's faster. The subconscious processes emotion in milliseconds. Logic takes seconds. In the space between those two, the decision has already been made. Now step back and think of how many rational moments in your life were actually emotional at their root. Why you chose that career, why you walked away from that deal, why you trusted that stranger, or felt uneasy with that friend. The reasons you told yourself later were stories. The decision had already been made. This doesn't make us weak. It makes us deeply human. And influence begins where that humanity is honored, not manipulated. So let's review what matters here. Confirmation bias, anchoring, availability, the halo effect, loss aversion. These are not tricks. They are lenses. And once you see them, you start to see through them. You start to speak with precision, not to manipulate, but to connect. Not to control, but to guide. And that leads us to an even deeper truth. Behind every behavior lies an emotion, and behind every emotion lies a need. If you want to influence, don't speak to behavior. Speak to the need beneath it. Because when that need is felt, when that longing is named, resistance dissolves, which is exactly what we're about to explore next. How emotion, not logic, drives the real machinery of decision-making, and how tapping into the right emotion can move mountains where facts fall flat. Every decision you've ever made was emotional first. The rational reasons you gave afterward, they were just the story your mind told to make the emotion acceptable. This is not weakness, it's design. Emotions are the first responders of the brain. They move before you think, before you weigh, before you even realize. Influence is not about fighting this truth. It's about embracing it. Because once you understand the emotional blueprint beneath human behavior, you stop trying to persuade minds and start speaking directly to hearts. Let's begin with the most primal emotion, fear. It lives at the bottom of almost every hesitation, every pause, every no. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of change. The brain is built to survive first, thrive second. So any message that feels even remotely dangerous, socially, financially, emotionally, is met with resistance, not analysis. That's why fear-based persuasion is so effective. Political campaigns know this. Insurance companies know this. Even public health uses fear to drive behavior. If you don't do X, you will lose Y. But fear without hope paralyzes. It must be followed with a path forward, a bridge to safety. Consider the global pandemic. Fear messaging was everywhere. Graphs, death tolls, projections. But what moved people to action was not fear alone. It was the clear promise of agency. Wear a mask, wash your hands, protect others. That path, simple and actionable, turned fear into focus. Next comes desire. While fear pushes, desire pulls. It creates movement by offering vision of freedom, success, love, status, beauty, peace. The most persuasive messages don't warn, they invite. They paint a vivid picture of what could be. They don't say, "Stop this," they say, "Imagine that." Luxury brands live on this. A watch isn't just a watch, it's a symbol of mastery. A sleek car isn't just transportation, it's affirmation. People buy what reflects who they want to be seen as. And when your message mirrors someone's desired identity, you don't need to convince them. They move toward it willingly. Then there is urgency. Urgency doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, "This won't last." It awakens the ancient brain's sensitivity to scarcity and time. The reason is biological. When something is slipping away, attention spikes. The brain tunes in fast. That's why limited time offers work. Not because they are logical, but because they activate loss aversion, an emotion stronger than gain. Now blend these together. Fear of missing out, desire for significance, the urgent need to belong or act. Emotion is the current beneath every yes. It's why countdowns increase sales, why red sale signs trigger buying, why a simple "only a few spots left" triggers commitment. that no amount of explanation ever could. But not all emotional triggers are primal. Some are nuanced. Take nostalgia, for instance. It's a quiet, golden thread to the past. When activated, it lowers defenses. People remember who they were or who they thought they were. Brands like Coca-Cola use this constantly, evoking simpler times, triggering warmth and trust. When someone feels something personal, they don't need logic. They already belong. And then there's trust. It may seem logical, but trust is emotional. It's built through signals, tone, posture, timing, consistency. Trust grows when someone's experience aligns with expectation over and over again. It breaks not through facts, but through emotional dissonance. That's why first impressions matter, why tone of voice matters, why a single broken promise can outweigh 10 truths. Because trust, once felt, grants permission. It allows you to influence without force. It lets you lead with a whisper. But how do you build trust with strangers? It begins with relatability. People trust those who feel familiar, and familiarity is emotional. It comes through mirroring language, speaking with simplicity, showing vulnerability. When someone says, "I've been where you are," they become more than a speaker. They become a guide. In storytelling, this is everything. Facts tell. Stories sell. Why? Because stories create emotional resonance. They bypass skepticism. They carry you in, not push you forward. You might forget a statistic, but you will remember a story that made you feel. Picture this: a child struggling to breathe in a polluted city, an asthma inhaler clutched to their chest. That image does more for environmental change than a chart ever will. Because people don't respond to numbers. They respond to meaning. And meaning is built from emotion. Emotion isn't the opposite of logic. It is the soil from which logic grows. It tells us why something matters. So when crafting influence, ask not only what you want someone to do, but what you want them to feel before they do it. Let's make this tangible. Imagine two fundraisers. One says, "Your donation will help provide food to thousands of people across the country." The other says, "Last night, Maria, a single mother, went to bed hungry so her children could eat. Tonight, your gift could put a warm meal on her table." Which message moves you? The second. Not because it's more important, but because it feels more real. Influence happens when the message becomes human. This is the secret behind the best communicators in the world. They don't just transfer information, they transfer emotion. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't recite data about inequality. He shared a dream. Steve Jobs didn't pitch RAM or resolution. He offered beauty, efficiency, freedom. People follow leaders not because of their plans, but because of how those plans make them feel. Emotion is the gateway to belief, and belief is the soil of behavior. Once you enter through feeling, logic can follow, but never the other way around. So ask yourself, what emotions are you creating when you speak? When you write? When you show up? If your message isn't moving someone emotionally, it isn't moving them at all. This brings us to a powerful shift. Once you master emotional triggers, you must learn to trigger them subconsciously. Not with flashy appeals, but with subtle cues, colors, words, placement, timing. Because when influence becomes invisible, it becomes unstoppable. And that's exactly where we're heading next, into the realm of subconscious influence, where the real game of persuasion begins. Beneath awareness, beneath resistance, there is an art to influencing someone without them realizing it. Not manipulation, true influence. the kind that slides beneath conscious thought and lands not in resistance, but in resonance. This is the realm of the subconscious, the silent driver of most human behavior. You might think that people make deliberate choices, that they weigh facts, consider pros and cons, and act accordingly. But over 95% of our decisions are made below the threshold of awareness. The subconscious doesn't need permission. It doesn't wait for logic. It acts, and that's where the most powerful forms of influence live. Let's start with a concept called priming. Priming is when a subtle cue alters someone's thoughts or behavior without them realizing they've been influenced. A word, an image, even a color can plant an idea in the mind, and that idea becomes a lens through which everything else is viewed. Imagine walking into a room that smells like lemon and pine. You're more likely to clean up after yourself. Why? Because your brain associates that scent with cleanliness. You weren't told to behave. You simply felt like it. That's priming at work. In another study, people exposed to words related to aging, like wrinkle, Florida, and gray, actually walked more slowly when leaving the room. The participants had no idea their bodies had responded to what their conscious minds barely noticed. That's how deeply the subconscious absorbs suggestion. Now, let's look at anchoring. Anchoring is when the first piece of information you receive becomes the reference point for all that follows. It shapes your perception of value, even if it's irrelevant. Imagine you're shopping for a watch. The first one you see costs $10,000. The second costs $2,000. Suddenly, the second feels affordable, even though it's still a huge expense. Your brain isn't evaluating the watch in isolation. It's comparing it to the anchor. Whoever controls the anchor controls the entire frame of perception. This is why effective influencers speak first in negotiations. Why stores display the most expensive items at the front. It's not about selling that item. It's about reframing everything else. Now think about the mere exposure effect. This bias says, the more familiar something feels, the more we tend to like and trust it, even if we don't remember having seen it before. It's why brands repeat their logos endlessly, why political campaigns plaster names everywhere. Familiarity breeds comfort. Comfort creates trust, and trust opens the door to influence. Want someone to feel closer to you? Show up more, not with pressure, but with presence. The mind likes what it knows, even faintly. And the more often you show up, the more known you become. And let's not forget micro behaviors. These are small, subconscious cues that the mind picks up in an instant. Eye contact, vocal tone, body posture, pacing. You can say all the right words, but if your voice trembles or your eyes dart, trust fades. The subconscious listens to more than words. It listens to signals. When you sit in a high-backed chair, speak slowly, or use downward inflections in your voice, you radiate authority. Not because you said you're powerful, but because you felt powerful, and the subconscious of your audience recognized that. Consider courtroom studies. Jurors are more likely to believe a confident, well-dressed witness, even if the content of their testimony is vague. Influence isn't always about substance. It's about the feeling you create in your presence. Now step into the world of product design. Ever wonder why luxury products are displayed under soft lighting on velvet surfaces? Because the brain maps sensory cues to value. Velvet feels rare. Dim light feels exclusive. The subconscious receives the message, this is special. Even if the item is ordinary, the subconscious also loves fluency. If something is easy to process, it feels more truthful. That's why rhymes, symmetry, and rhythm are persuasive. What flows, goes. A message that is catchy, repeatable, and smooth bypasses doubt and embeds itself deeply. This is why the best slogans don't explain. They sing. Just do it. Think different. Because you're worth it. They don't argue. They embed. So how do you apply this? First, recognize that the environment is part of the message. Where you speak, how you dress, even what's behind you. These are all channels of influence. The brain takes in the full picture, not just the sentence. Second, plant cues early. If you want to be seen as trustworthy, speak calmly, with steady cadence and direct gaze. If you want to inspire urgency, use sharper movement, quicker pacing, and scarcity language. But above all, match your inner state. The subconscious detects congruence. You cannot fake what you don't feel. Influence requires emotional alignment. Third, repeat strategically. Familiarity is persuasive. Say their name. Repeat your core message in different ways. Introduce themes early that will pay off later. You are not just delivering content. You are weaving subconscious memory. Finally, remember this. The most powerful persuasion is invisible. When someone feels they made the choice freely, they are more committed to it. That's the art. Not an overpowering choice, but in shaping the field so that your desired outcome feels like their own discovery. Think of the greatest influencers throughout history. They didn't push. They pulled. They didn't force. They aligned. They didn't shout. They echoed inner truths that people hadn't yet put into words. This is the power of subconscious influence. To shape perception without pressure. To move others through suggestion, presence, and emotional texture. To be felt more than heard, remembered more than noticed. And once you learn to operate in that realm, you no longer need to argue. You no longer need to convince. You simply become the one people gravitate toward without quite knowing why. Which brings us to our next turn in the journey. How society itself is a grand architect of belief, and how understanding cultural conditioning lets you influence not just individuals, but entire systems of thought. From the moment you were born, the world began whispering into your mind. Not through loud declarations, but through repetition, reward, punishment, praise. This is good. That is bad. This is normal. That is strange. Before you had the words to question, the world had already begun its shaping. This is social conditioning. And if you've never questioned it, it means it worked. You see, influence doesn't always come from individuals. Often, it flows from systems, culture, media, education, religion, peer pressure. These forces shape how we think, what we value, even what we believe we're capable of. And they do it not through logic, but through normalization. Children aren't taught to obey because it's logical. They're taught that obedience equals approval. Smiles for sitting still. Praise for staying quiet. Over time, the nervous system associates conformity with safety, and that connection burrows deep. Now fast forward. That child becomes an adult, hesitant to speak up in meetings. They say it's shyness, but really, it's conditioning. A subconscious rule: don't disrupt, don't stand out, stay safe. Social conditioning is subtle. It's not always a law. Sometimes it's a look, a silence, a pattern repeated 1,000 times. And the more it's repeated, the more it feels like truth. Think about the rules you live by. How to dress, how to love, what success looks like. Did you choose them, or did you inherit them? Let's look closer at the architects behind these invisible rules. First, education. Most schools aren't designed to cultivate critical thought. They're designed to create consistency. Sit here, memorize that, obey the bell, challenge the system, and you're difficult. But follow the script, and you're rewarded. Now multiply that experience by millions of students across decades. You don't get thinkers, you get conformers. And conformity is easy to influence. Next, media and entertainment. Television doesn't just entertain, it programs. Who gets shown as powerful? Who gets shown as the joke? What's considered beautiful, acceptable, desirable? These stories, repeated day after day, shape cultural norms. We absorb them unconsciously. Think of beauty standards. They didn't arrive naturally. They were curated, marketed, refined. Whole industries are built on telling people what's wrong with them so they'll pay to feel acceptable. It's not just persuasion, it's conditioning. Then there's religion and morality. Regardless of belief system, religious frameworks often install binary thinking: good versus evil, obedience versus rebellion, sacred versus sinful. These frameworks create strong emotional boundaries around what is right. Again, this isn't inherently wrong, but it becomes dangerous when people stop questioning and start internalizing, equating disobedience with shame, curiosity with sin. Now, influence doesn't need to persuade. It only needs to threaten exclusion, and that leads us to peer groups. The most powerful form of conditioning is often social. If your tribe thinks a certain way, you will too. Not because of logic, but because of belonging. In tribal history, exile meant death, and that instinct remains. We crave approval. We avoid judgment. This is why people laugh at jokes they don't find funny, vote for things they don't understand, stay silent when they disagree, because the mind says, better to belong than to be right. Now, here's the key. None of this is inherently malicious. Social conditioning is what allows societies to function. It provides structure, shared values, predictability. But if you don't see it, it controls you. And if you want to influence others, you must understand what's already influencing them. This is where ethical persuasion begins. Not by adding pressure, but by recognizing the pressures they already live under. You want someone to try something new? Realize they're not just choosing between options. They're choosing between identities, between fitting in and standing out, between safety and risk. You must offer them a bridge, not just to the new idea, but to a new self-concept. One that still belongs. One that feels familiar enough to be safe, yet different enough to be desirable. That's the essence of reframing influence inside systems. It's not about breaking beliefs. It's about offering better ones. Consider a cultural shift like smoking. For decades, smoking was glamorous, sophisticated, a symbol of cool. Then came the campaigns, not just logical ones, but emotional rebranding. Smokers weren't rebels. They were victims of corporations. Non-smokers weren't boring. They were smart, protective, modern. The result? Behavior shifted. Not because the science changed, but because the social narrative changed. This is the power of reconditioning. As an influencer, whether as a teacher, a leader, a creator, you are either reinforcing someone's internal programming or offering them the tools to rewrite it. So ask, what rules has your audience absorbed from society? What identities have been prescribed to them? What fears hold those in place? If you want to lead them, first liberate them. Here's how. Expose the script. Shine light on the invisible beliefs they've inherited. Name them. Normalize questioning. Offer a better frame. Don't just say, that belief is wrong. Say, here's a better way to see it. Make the new belief feel empowering. Model the alternative. Show, don't tell. Let your presence embody the freedom you want them to step into. Honor their resistance. Don't shame hesitation. Recognize that every belief was once a form of safety. Then show how growth is now the safer choice. Ultimately, influence at the societal level is not about pressure. It's about permission. Permission to think differently, to feel differently, to become someone different. You are not just speaking to a person. You are speaking to a system inside them. And to shift that system, you must speak with respect, precision, and care. Because once someone begins to decondition themselves, once they realize their rules are not universal truths, but inherited beliefs, they are no longer passive. They become architects of their own mind. And that, more than anything, prepares them for the next level of influence. How to reshape not just the system within, but the story they live by. Which leads us into our next exploration. The subtle, powerful art of controlling perception through framing, and how those who master it shape the world. The facts don't change, but the frame does, and with it, the entire story. You see, humans don't respond to objective truth. We respond to perceived meaning. We don't see reality as it is. We see it through filters, emotion, memory, context, and the most powerful among us aren't those who argue harder. They are those who control the frame. Framing is the hidden lever of influence. Change the frame, and you change the meaning. Change the meaning, and you change the behavior. Imagine this. A doctor tells two patients the same thing. To one, she says, "This procedure has a 90% survival rate." To the other, she says, "There's a 10% chance you won't make it." Same fact. But the first patient feels hopeful. The second feels terrified. That's not logic, it's framing. Framing works because the brain relies on context to assign value. And context isn't objective, it's emotional. This principle is everywhere. A meal described as chef-curated feels different than one called standard. A speech labeled inspirational lands softer than one labeled controversial. People believe not what is said, but how it is presented. Master influencers know this. They don't argue the content. They reshape the container. Consider pricing. A company offers 3 products. One costs $30, the second $60, and the third $200. Most people choose the $60 option. Why? Because it feels like the middle ground. But that $200 product? It wasn't meant to sell. It was meant to anchor the rest. Suddenly, 60 feels reasonable. That's contrast framing in action. It guides decision-making not by pushing, but by positioning. Or take a public figure responding to scandal. Instead of denying it, they say, "This experience made me stronger. It revealed where I needed to grow." The facts remain, but now it's a redemption story, not a downfall. That's reframing weakness into strength. And it doesn't just work in crisis. It works in everyday life. A nervous job applicant says, "I don't have experience in this field." The confident one says, "I bring a fresh, cross-disciplinary perspective." Same reality, completely different frame. Framing is not lying. It's leading perception. It's asking, how do I want this to feel? What emotional lens will make it most powerful? Now let's explore the deeper mechanics. The mind is contrast-driven. We rarely evaluate something on its own. We compare it against what came before, against what's beside it. This is why skilled presenters lead with pain before offering a solution. It makes the solution feel like relief, even if it's ordinary. This is why luxury brands price an item outrageously high, then run a private sale that brings it down just below what you'd consider outrageous. Suddenly, you feel like you're winning, even though they've simply reframed the loss. The order of presentation matters. The sequence becomes the story. The first thing you say becomes the anchor. The last thing you say becomes the echo. Both stick longer than the middle. That's why politicians open with strength and end with vision. That's why marketers lead with emotion and close with scarcity. The framing of words is just as powerful as numbers. Would you rather be called unemployed or between opportunities? Does it matter if someone is cheap or financially conscious? Is someone aggressive or passionately assertive? Language paints emotional frames, and emotion drives perception. This is how powerful myths are built, not by overwhelming facts, but by consistent repetition of a compelling frame. Take political movements. They don't win with policy. They win with identity. We are the defenders of freedom. We are the voice of the people. These are not fact claims. They are story frames. And once people buy into the frame, they justify the content inside it, even when it's flawed. That's the dangerous side of framing. If used unethically, it can blind. But used responsibly, it can liberate. By helping people reframe limiting beliefs, past failures, or self-doubt into something empowering. And this is where framing becomes not just influence, but healing. A person who once said, "I'm broken," can reframe their past as, "I've survived more than most." Someone who sees their anxiety as weakness can reframe it as sensitivity, a signal of deep attunement to their environment. Leaders can reframe failure as iteration. Brands can reframe a delay as a chance to refine for excellence. Parents can reframe a child's stubbornness as early leadership. Framing turns pain into power, embarrassment into empathy, and endings into beginnings. But remember, the frame must feel authentic. If it's hollow, people sense it. The subconscious detects incongruence, and once that trust is broken, no frame can save it. So how do you use framing in your influence? 1. Lead with contrast. Show the difference between pain and solution. Then place your idea in the space of relief. 2. Choose your metaphors wisely. People think in pictures. Compare your message to something emotionally resonant and familiar. 3. Control the first impression. The opening defines the lens. Set it with power. 4. Repeat your frame. Repetition solidifies perception. Say it again, then echo it in new language. 5. Close with empowerment. Let your audience walk away feeling strong, seen, and ready. Framing is not about changing the facts. It's about changing the feeling. And when you change the feeling, you change everything. Now imagine stacking this power with another. Not just shaping how someone sees the world, but how they respond to others in it. That's where we head next. Into the social realm, where proof, conformity, and collective cues drive behavior more than we dare admit. Because once you master framing, the next step is mastering social proof and learning how the crowd itself becomes your most powerful messenger. People like to believe they are independent thinkers, but more often than not, their behavior follows a much older impulse, the instinct to belong. And that instinct doesn't seek truth. It seeks alignment, acceptance, safety in numbers. This is the quiet force of social proof. A psychological shortcut that whispers, if others are doing it, it must be right. In evolutionary terms, this made sense. In uncertain environments, copying the tribe improved chances of survival. If everyone ran from a sound in the bushes, you ran too. If the group avoided a food source, so did you. The cost of independent thinking was often death. That ancient reflex still lives in you today. When you're unsure what to do, you look around. Reviews, ratings, follower counts, crowd behavior. These cues shape your choices more than logic ever could. Because in moments of uncertainty, certainty by consensus feels safer than personal risk. Social proof is why laugh tracks exist in sitcoms, why restaurants with a line outside feel more desirable, why people tip more when the jar is already filled with bills. We see the crowd and assume the crowd knows something we don't. This principle is especially powerful in ambiguous situations. When people aren't sure how to act, they default to what others are doing. That's how culture is reinforced. That's how trends spread. And that's how influence gains momentum. Now, social proof isn't just one force. It comes in many forms, each triggering different aspects of human psychology. First, there's expert social proof. When someone perceived as knowledgeable endorses a product, idea, or behavior, we're more likely to follow. Think of doctors in commercials, authors with PhD after their names, or TED speakers who gain credibility from the platform itself. The assumption is, if this expert believes it, I should too. Second, there's celebrity social proof, influence by association. When someone famous uses a product, wears a brand, or supports a cause, it gains status. Not because the celebrity is credible, but because they carry aspirational weight. People want to imitate what they admire. Third, user social proof. This is the most relatable form. When we see people like us using something, we feel safer trying it. Online reviews, testimonial videos, before and after stories. These aren't authorities or celebrities, they're peers, and that makes their influence feel authentic. Fourth, crowd social proof. Numbers speak. Over 1 million sold. Join 500,000 subscribers. Top trending now. The logic is simple. If many have chosen this, it must be good. Whether or not it actually is becomes secondary. Fifth, situational social proof. This emerges in the moment. You walk into a room and see everyone facing one direction. You'll likely turn too. You sit at a dinner where everyone is silent. You'll quiet down. You're at a conference where everyone applauds. You join in. Not because you agreed, but because you didn't want to be the only one who didn't. This is the power of conformity, and it can be used to lead behavior at scale. Now, let's look at how social proof is engineered. Savvy influencers and marketers don't wait for proof. They manufacture it. Early on, they seed testimonials, show numbers, create artificial waitlists, even simulate popularity until it becomes real. Think about this. Before a restaurant opens, it invites influencers to dine for free and post glowing reviews. On launch night, they control the pace of seating to ensure a visible line forms outside. Passers-by see that line and assume the food must be worth waiting for. It's not about the food, it's about the frame, and the crowd becomes the message. The same happens online. Products launch with limited spots available, even when the supply is limitless. Courses open to select members only. Apps show how many users are online right now. These cues create urgency, credibility, and trust, all without a single claim being made. Now step back and realize, people don't just follow the crowd. They internalize the crowd's opinion as their own. This is internalized conformity. When you see enough positive reviews about a movie, you walk in expecting to enjoy it. And that expectation shapes your perception. In Persuasion, this is gold. But there's a dark side. Social proof also fuels misinformation. Rumors, conspiracy theories, mob behavior. When enough people believe, repost, or repeat a message, it gains perceived legitimacy, even when it's false. This is why ethical influence matters. Just because you can manufacture consensus doesn't mean you should. Influence without integrity collapses when truth catches up. But when used responsibly, social proof can change lives. It can normalize healthy habits, make new ideas feel safe, break stigma, accelerate adoption of technology, medicine, and mindset. It can make someone feel, I'm not alone. And that feeling opens the heart to transformation. So how do you apply social proof in your message? 1. Show that others have chosen you. Display testimonials, user stats, endorsements. Let others speak for you. 2. Use relatable voices. The best testimonials aren't the flashiest. They're the ones your audience sees themselves in. 3. Create visible engagement. Showcase comments, reviews, shares, or participation metrics. People follow momentum. 4. Leverage early adopters. Treat your first supporters like gold. Their enthusiasm becomes your foundation. 5. Highlight consensus. Phrases like, most people who try this, or our top-selling program, subtly guide perception. But here's the real key. Never fake it. If your social proof is built on illusion, it may work once, but it won't last. True influence sustains itself when it's rooted in authenticity and value. Now take this one step further. Imagine pairing social proof with urgency, scarcity, emotional resonance. Suddenly, your message doesn't just land, it multiplies. You become not just a voice, but a movement. And to truly drive that momentum, there's one more force to master: the psychology of scarcity. The emotional magnetism of what feels rare, fleeting, or exclusive. Because nothing moves human behavior faster than the fear of missing out. Scarcity is a mirror held up to human desire. It reflects not only what we want, but how much we fear not having it. And when that fear is activated, it moves people faster than logic, stronger than persuasion, and deeper than even storytelling. This is the psychology of scarcity and urgency. When something feels limited, whether in time, quantity, or access, it instantly becomes more valuable in the human mind. Not because the thing itself has changed, but because the opportunity to have it might vanish. Think about it. You're scrolling through a website and see the words, "Only 2 left in stock," or "Offer ends tonight at midnight." You weren't planning to buy, but suddenly the pressure rises. Not having it feels worse than needing it ever felt good. That's loss aversion, and it drives behavior with primal intensity. Scarcity works because the human brain is wired to prioritize survival. And loss, even in symbolic form, triggers survival instincts. We don't want to miss out. We don't want to be left behind. And so, we act. But there are different forms of scarcity, and each plays a unique role in influence. 1. Quantity-based scarcity. This is the classic limited supply tactic. It plays on the idea that what is rare must be valuable. Think luxury watches released in batches of 100, limited edition sneakers, or collectible items. Even when mass-produced, the illusion of scarcity elevates the item's status. 2. Time-based scarcity. Deadlines light a fire in the mind. Flash sales, countdown timers, early bird pricing. Doors close Friday. These frames force a decision by compressing the window of opportunity. And when the clock ticks, attention sharpens. Action accelerates. 3. Access-based scarcity. Think invitations, exclusivity, insider clubs. When access is restricted, it becomes desirable, regardless of the offer. Humans crave what's just beyond reach. Waitlist only. Application required. By referral. It makes people feel that belonging is a reward. 4. Competition-based scarcity. When others are chasing the same prize, urgency increases. Think auctions, only one left notices, or 5 people are viewing this now. This form of scarcity triggers status anxiety. The fear isn't just missing out, it's losing to someone else. All of these use different angles to stimulate the same feeling. If I don't act now, I'll regret it. And it works. Scarcity has been shown in countless studies to increase conversions, shorten decision time, and raise perceived value. But here's what separates ethical influence from manipulation. The scarcity must be real. Artificial scarcity, lying about availability or fabricating urgency, may trigger action in the short term. But once trust breaks, influence dies. The relationship is transactional at best, toxic at worst. The real power of scarcity isn't in trickery, it's in framing what's truly finite. For example, your time, your attention, your personal involvement, these are limited. When you offer them sincerely, scarcity is natural. A live event with Q&A access, a coaching program with capped enrollment, a product where you've poured hours of craftsmanship. These are real constraints. And when communicated with clarity, they drive urgency without deception. Let's look at an example: concert tickets. A famous band announces a one-night-only performance. Limited seats, early bird pre-sale, waitlist for the rest. Demand surges. Why? The band could have added more shows. But the scarcity isn't about logic. It's about emotion. It becomes an event, a status symbol, a chance to say, I was there. The lesson? Scarcity turns the ordinary into the urgent, and the urgent into the valuable. But scarcity alone isn't enough. It must be paired with a desire. You don't want people to feel panicked. You want them to feel drawn in, like they're on the edge of something that matters. This is where urgency enters as scarcity's twin. Scarcity says, this is rare. Urgency says, act now. And together, they become a psychological trigger few can resist. In digital marketing, you see this everywhere. Countdown timers on landing pages, cart abandonment emails that say, only a few hours left, Black Friday deals with a hard deadline, early bird bonuses that disappear at midnight. But these tools aren't just for selling. They can be used in communication, leadership, negotiation. Want someone to prioritize your message? Frame it as time-sensitive. Want someone to commit now instead of later? Frame the opportunity as fleeting. Want to spark motivation in a team? Create a shared window where focus matters most. We have 30 days. Let's make them count. The effectiveness lies not in the tool, but in how real it feels. The brain categorizes urgency as importance. If it must happen now, it must matter. So when you combine a meaningful offer with time-sensitive framing, you guide attention to where it needs to be. But use it with care. Urgency fatigue is real. Constant countdowns, endless limited deals, and artificial pressure lead to skepticism. People begin to tune out. Worse, they resent the tactic, and by extension, the messenger. So what's the key? Authenticity and alignment. Be clear about why the scarcity exists. Use urgency to highlight focus, not fear. Align the time pressure with the real value, so the decision feels empowered, not coerced. Remember, the most ethical scarcity is purpose-driven. It protects your time, honors your energy, and respects your audience's attention. Now imagine combining scarcity with social proof. You're not just saying, few spots left. You're showing the crowd moving, the countdown ticking, and the benefit growing. This isn't manipulation, it's momentum. And when you add emotional resonance, when the offer feels like a bridge to identity, transformation, or belonging, you don't need to sell. People step forward because they feel they must. This leads us naturally to the next principle, the quiet but enduring force that anchors every decision once it's made. commitment, and consistency. Once someone says yes, especially in public, they will fight to stay aligned with that decision, often beyond reason. Because the next layer of influence isn't in the first action, it's in what follows. The deep psychological need to stay consistent with who we believe we are. People don't just make decisions, they defend them. Once a choice is made, a line is drawn. And the mind, eager to protect its sense of identity, will fight to stay consistent with it. This is the quiet gravity of commitment and consistency. A principle so powerful, it shapes careers, relationships, belief systems, even self-image. The moment we declare something, especially in public, it becomes part of who we are. And few things are harder to change than the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. Let's begin at the smallest level. A simple yes. In one classic study, researchers went door to door asking residents to display a small "Be a safe driver" sign in their windows. A few weeks later, they returned with a much larger request to install a massive billboard on their lawn promoting the same cause. Remarkably, those who agreed to the small sign were 4 times more likely to say yes to the giant billboard. Why? Because saying yes the first time triggered a psychological shift. They now saw themselves as someone who supports safety. To refuse the second request would feel inconsistent. That's the key. Once you commit, you begin to align your identity with that action. This is why free trials work. Why low-entry offers lead to high-ticket purchases. Why asking someone to just consider something paves the way for full adoption. Once the door cracks open, the mind does the rest. But this principle goes far beyond marketing. It shapes our personal lives. Think about the person who's stuck in a career they no longer love, but stays because they told everyone this was their dream. Or the individual who holds on to a belief, not because it serves them, but because admitting otherwise would mean admitting they were wrong. This isn't stupidity. It's self-preservation. The need to feel stable, to appear consistent in a world that values decisiveness. And here's where influence becomes subtle but surgical. You don't need to force behavior. You only need to guide the first step. Because if that step is small, easy, and aligned with a person's values, they'll take it. And once they do, they'll likely take the next, and the next, until the path becomes identity. This is called the foot in the door technique. It works not because you're clever, but because you're patient. Influence isn't always a big win. Sometimes it's a series of small yeses that build toward a transformation. But not all commitments are created equal. The most powerful are public. When someone says something out loud, on social media, to a friend, in front of a group, their need to stay consistent skyrockets. The fear of being seen as wishy-washy kicks in, and so they stay loyal to their stance, even when new evidence arises. You've seen this in politics. A voter supports a candidate early, and even after scandal, they double down. Not because they agree, but because switching sides feels like disloyalty to themselves. Their vote became a part of their identity. This is why movements begin not with persuasion, but with belonging. They make people feel part of something. And once that sense of tribe is formed, consistency does the rest. You don't leave a cause easily, not when it defines you. Now flip this around. As someone seeking to influence, your job isn't to push, it's to offer small invitations to commit. And once committed, to reinforce that identity. For example, if you're launching a wellness program, don't start by asking someone to overhaul their diet. Ask them to commit to a 3-day hydration challenge. Once they do, affirm, "See, you're the kind of person who honors your health." That reframing matters. You're not just celebrating action, you're installing identity. and identity is what sustains consistency. Let's take this further. Consistency doesn't just reinforce behavior, it reshapes belief. A person who donates to a charity may begin to believe they care more about the cause than they previously thought. Why? Because the mind hates cognitive dissonance. It wants alignment between actions and beliefs. So it rewrites belief to match behavior. This is why the first donation, the first petition signed, the first event attended. These are golden moments. They create a psychological hook. And once embedded, that person will continue to act in accordance with who they now believe themselves to be. Influencers understand this. They don't just build audiences, they build self-images. You're not just buying a course, you're becoming someone who invests in their future. You're not just following a page, you're joining a movement. You're not just reading this book, you're stepping into mastery. Each statement shifts the action from transaction to transformation. Because once the message moves from "do this" to "this is who you are," the consistency drive kicks in, and it's powerful. But as with all influence, this power must be used with care. Consistency can trap just as easily as it can liberate. People stay in toxic patterns because they once committed, stay in unhealthy relationships because they once said, "I'll never leave," stay loyal to ideas that no longer serve them because changing would mean admitting error. As an ethical influencer, your role is not just to encourage consistency, but to build healthy starting points. Guide people to commit to ideas, identities, and actions that elevate them, that free them, that support long-term alignment with growth, not stagnation. So, how do you activate commitment and consistency in your message? 1. Start small. Design an easy first step, a micro yes, something frictionless. 2. Make it visible. Encourage public declaration, even subtly. Comment below if you're in. Tag a friend. Post your goal. 3. Link to identity. Reinforce not just what they did, but who that makes them. You showed up. That means something. 4. Build progression. Stack commitments logically. Let each step affirm the last and prepare for the next. 5. Celebrate alignment. Frame follow-through as evidence of character. See? You're the kind of person who follows through. Now step back and see the pattern. You're not pressuring. You're guiding. You're not demanding. You're designing an experience of self-affirmation. Because when people act in a way that feels aligned, they'll fight to stay aligned. Not for you, but for themselves. And that brings us to the next lever of influence: authority. The force that doesn't just guide behavior, but commands it. Because when someone is perceived as a leader, an expert, or a voice of certainty, people follow, often without question. And when used with wisdom, authority doesn't dominate, it liberates. Authority is one of the most primal forces in human psychology. It doesn't ask, it doesn't beg, it simply is. And when people sense it, they often comply, not because they agree, but because something deeper inside tells them they should. From childhood, we're conditioned to obey figures of authority. Parents, teachers, police officers, doctors, judges. The pattern is clear. Those in positions of status know better, and it's safer to follow than to question. But here's the truth. Most people miss. Perceived authority is often more powerful than real authority. It's not about whether someone is truly competent. It's about whether they appear competent. And that appearance is constructed through signals: tone, posture, confidence, credentials, and context. Consider the famous Milgram experiment from the 1960s. Participants were instructed by a researcher in a white lab coat to deliver increasingly painful electric shocks to another person. Despite the actor's screams, completely fabricated, the majority of participants obeyed. Why? Because the man in the lab coat looked like an authority. He sounded certain. He wore the uniform. That was enough. Authority bypasses logic. It triggers compliance. It tells the brain, you don't need to think. Someone else already has. Now, imagine using that force. Not to manipulate, but to guide. Not to dominate, but to direct attention toward clarity, truth, and action. That's ethical authority. And it starts with credibility. Credibility is built in two ways: external signals and internal coherence. External signals are the visible badges of authority: degrees, titles, uniforms, associations. A doctor in front of a name, a best-selling author badge, a brand associated with excellence. These cues signal competence, whether or not it's true. Internal coherence, on the other hand, is deeper. It's when your words, tone, and presence all say the same thing. When you speak with calm conviction. When your message is consistent over time. When you don't flinch, hedge, or apologize for your insight. Together, these two forms of authority, outer and inner, create an aura. The kind that makes people lean in, even before they fully understand why. Let's break this down further. The voice of authority is steady, not rushed, not frantic. It doesn't seek validation, it declares, not arrogantly, but clearly. The posture of authority is grounded, shoulders back, eyes direct, no fidgeting, no avoidance. A calm, centered presence says more than any resume. The language of authority is confident, but not rigid. It avoids weak phrases like, I think, maybe, I'm not sure. Instead, it frames insight like this: what we've found is, or here's what works best. The environment of authority reinforces the message. A stage, a well-lit Zoom call, clean design, subtle details, like how you enter a room or begin a conversation, signal power before a word is spoken. But here's the nuance. Real authority is not loud. It's not domineering. In fact, true authority is often quiet. The most powerful figures don't speak the most. They speak last. And when they do, people listen. Think of leaders like Nelson Mandela, Angela Merkel, Barack Obama. Their power wasn't in volume. It was in gravity, a grounded presence, a sense of certainty not based on ego, but on earned voice. So how do you earn that voice? You provide value before asking for attention. You share insight that shifts perception. You embody what you teach. That embodiment matters more than any logo or title, because people follow what they feel is trustworthy. Let's talk about another layer: borrowed authority. You may not have global credentials, but if you're associated with those who do, the subconscious mind will transfer credibility from them to you. This is why brands collaborate with known influencers, why authors seek forewords from respected thinkers, why businesses display logos of media features, even minor ones. It's not about ego, it's about leverage. Association builds perception. Perception builds trust. Trust creates influence. Now combine that with social proof, the last principle we discussed. A person with authority and visible followers, praise or endorsements, becomes nearly irresistible. It's the magic of certainty plus consensus. But here's where caution is needed. Authority can corrupt, not always by design, but by ease. When people stop questioning you, when your words go unchallenged, you can start believing you're always right. History is filled with cautionary tales, leaders who silenced dissent, movements that demanded blind obedience, brands that collapsed under arrogance. All began with authority and lost their way when they forgot humility. So, let's ground ourselves in ethical authority. Ethical authority is earned through service. It's reinforced through humility. It invites respect, but never demands it. It speaks clearly, but listens more. It directs attention, not toward the self, but toward the truth. When you embody this kind of authority, people don't just follow you. They grow from following you. They become better versions of themselves. That's the mark of a true leader. Let's make this practical. To build your authority in any space, 1. Clarify your domain. Be known for something specific. General expertise feels vague. Specialization commands trust. 2. Speak with certainty, not arrogance, but grounded clarity. People trust those who trust themselves. 3. Show proof of results. Share stories, data, and testimonials that demonstrate real-world impact. 4. Align words with presence. Let your tone, body language, and energy say what your mouth doesn't need to. 5. Associate with credible voices. Be seen with those already trusted. Borrow trust wisely. 6. Serve before you sell. Offer value that creates insight, clarity, or transformation before asking for anything. Authority isn't about being above others. It's about being ahead, just far enough to light the path. And when you do that with integrity, consistency, and care, you don't need to persuade. People will follow, not blindly, but willingly. And that prepares us for the next evolution in influence. Not just persuading in the moment, but planting decisions before they even arise. Shaping perception so subtly that agreement feels inevitable. That's the realm of persuasion, framing, and linguistic priming, where the conversation is already halfway won before it even begins. Influence doesn't always begin with a message. Sometimes it begins with the moment before the message, with a look, a word, a subtle setup that shifts the lens through which everything that follows is interpreted. This is the psychology of persuasion, the art of setting the stage before you speak, so that what you say lands deeper, feels truer, and becomes more persuasive without resistance. Think of it like lighting in a theater. The performance might be brilliant, but if the stage is dim, the magic is lost. Persuasion is the lighting, the framing, the silent architecture of perception. One of the most powerful tools of persuasion is linguistic priming, using carefully selected words to influence the emotional and cognitive state of your listener before the core message is delivered. For example, in one study, participants were asked to unscramble words like hostile, rude, and aggressive. Shortly after, they were more likely to interrupt a conversation, a behavior aligned with the emotional tone they had just absorbed. Another group, primed with gentler words, behaved more patiently. Why? Because the subconscious doesn't just react to words, it absorbs them. It uses them to predict what's coming next. So if you say, "Imagine a peaceful garden," and then begin your pitch, the mind is already in a more receptive, softened state. Now, bring this into real life. A job candidate who begins with, "Let me share a moment that completely shifted how I lead," is already positioning themselves as someone who grows, reflects, leads. Before qualifications are even listed, the stage is set. Or a speaker opening with, "What I'm about to share might challenge some of your long-held beliefs, but it might also free you," preconditions the audience to expect disruption, but also benefit. This is not manipulation. This is mental preparation. Now combine priming with semantic framing, the subtle art of word choice. Consider these pairs: tax relief versus tax cut, collateral damage versus civilian deaths, invest in your future versus spend your money. Each version says the same thing, but paints a radically different emotional picture. That picture colors judgment. It sets the emotional tone. It tells the listener not just what to think, but how to feel while thinking it. Great influencers don't just choose their messages. They choose their metaphors, their imagery, their rhythm. Because rhythm, too, influences belief. This is the power of linguistic fluency. Messages that flow easily through rhyme, alliteration, or balance feel more trustworthy. What flows, goes. It's not logic. It's cognitive ease. That's why "an apple a day keeps the doctor away" is remembered. Not because of its clinical truth, but because it sounds like truth. Let's not forget the role of contrast framing. Human judgment thrives on comparison. We rarely evaluate in isolation. We decide based on what's next to what. Offer a $300 course, and it may seem expensive. But if you first mention a $900 alternative, the $300 feels like a deal. The course didn't change. The context did. Now think about how you can apply this. Introduce a premium version first to make your standard offer feel like high value. Present a difficult situation, then offer your idea as a form of relief. Use loss-framed language to heighten urgency. Most people miss this opportunity, but persuasion isn't just about the audience. It's also about you. How you prepare yourself to communicate from a state of influence. When you prime your own emotional state, calm, confident, intentional, you transmit that energy. If you rush, doubt, or hesitate, your words carry that shadow. If you breathe, ground, and believe, your message enters with weight. This is why some people say very little, but everything lands. Let's explore how environment plays a role too. The setting in which influence occurs alters its impact. A negotiation in a glass office feels different than one in a dim cafe. A heartfelt conversation in nature feels more open than one in a fluorescent-lit boardroom. Want your idea to feel fresh? Share it in a setting that feels creative. Want your message to feel intimate? Lower the lights. Reduce distractions. Sit closer. The space is part of the persuasion. And now we come to a golden technique: preemptive framing. When you anticipate resistance and name it first, you disarm it. Example: you might be thinking, "This won't work for me." And honestly, I had the same thought. That sentence doesn't weaken your message. It builds trust. It says, "I see you. I've been you. And I still believe this is worth hearing." Preemptive framing validates skepticism without feeding it. It builds a bridge over doubt instead of trying to bulldoze through it. It also works in sensitive conversations. This might be difficult to hear, but it's said with care. What I'm about to say may not be easy, but it's necessary. You may disagree with me, and that's okay, but let's explore it together. Suddenly, you're not just delivering a message. You're leading an experience, a journey of lowered defenses and raised receptivity. This is influence before the pitch, impact before the idea, alignment before the ask. Let's pull the threads together. To master persuasion: 1. Prime with emotion. Begin with imagery, questions, or stories that set the tone. 2. Choose high-trust language. Swap "maybe" and "I think" for "what I've found is," and most people who try this. 3. Use metaphor and rhythm. Speak in patterns the brain finds pleasant. They stick. 4. Frame by contrast. Show difference. Better feels better when it's next to worse. 5. Disarm with preemptive empathy. Name objections before they arise. Lead, don't defend. 6. Set the space. The room is part of the message. So is your energy. Because the most influential communicators don't just deliver insight. They prepare the mind to receive it. They don't argue, they arrange. They don't force belief. They create the conditions in which belief feels like a natural conclusion. This is persuasion before persuasion. A conversation that begins before the first word. And when paired with emotion, consistency, authority, and trust, it becomes nearly unstoppable. Now imagine using that kind of invisible influence not just once, but consistently, over time, through tone, through presence, through repetition. That's where we head next, into the psychology of trust and reciprocity, the two forces that turn influence from a moment into a bond. Trust is slow to build and fast to break. It doesn't arrive with a pitch. It doesn't bloom from a clever phrase. Trust emerges from repeated coherence, from the deep and consistent alignment between what is said, what is felt, and what is done. Without trust, persuasion becomes manipulation. With it, influence becomes effortless. This is the emotional infrastructure behind all long-term influence. Trust and reciprocity. Let's start with trust. Trust isn't logical, it's biological. Neuroscience shows that when people feel trust, their brains release oxytocin, the bonding chemical. The same one released during a hug, a shared laugh, or a deep conversation. It softens defenses, lowers cortisol, increases cooperation. Trust is not just felt, it's embodied. And your ability to influence long-term rests entirely on whether people feel safe in your presence. Safe to hear you. Safe to believe you. Safe to follow you. So how is trust built? 3 pillars: competence, integrity, and benevolence. Competence. Do you know what you're doing? Can you deliver results? Integrity. Do your actions match your words? Are you consistent even when no one's watching? Benevolence. Do you care? Are your intentions aligned with the well-being of others or only yourself? When any of these 3 are missing, trust falters. But when they align, influence becomes sustainable. Think of a doctor. You trust her not just because of her degree, competence, but because she's honest when she doesn't know, integrity, and because she listens without rushing, benevolence. Together, these traits form emotional gravity, a pull that transcends persuasion. But here's the real key. Trust is built most quickly through small moments, micro behaviors, not the polished presentation, but the remembered pause, the eye contact, the timely follow-up, the way you speak to someone when no one else is watching. And once trust is in place, it creates a gateway for reciprocity. Reciprocity is one of the oldest forces in human society. It says, "When you give to me, I feel compelled to give back." Not because of obligation, but because of emotional balance. The mind seeks symmetry in relationships. We don't like to feel indebted, and we definitely don't like to feel exploited. When someone gives sincerely, without expectation, they plant a seed. That seed grows quietly in the subconscious of the recipient, and at the right moment, it blooms into action. This is why generosity is so persuasive. Consider the restaurant that offers a free appetizer. The customer tips more, or the coach who gives away a free ebook packed with value. The reader feels grateful and far more open to the paid offer later. Not because of manipulation, but because value creates motion. But here's the nuance. True reciprocity begins with intention. If the gift is a tactic, it backfires. People feel the difference between sincerity and strategy. When someone gives with strings, it feels like a trap. When they give from a place of service, it creates loyalty. You've seen this dynamic in relationships. A friend helps you move, no questions asked. Later, you don't even hesitate to return the favor. That's reciprocity in its purest form. The same dynamic plays out in business, leadership, education, even marketing. Want to increase commitment? Give first. Not always in the form of money, but in time, insight, kindness, or effort. Let people feel your generosity, not through grand gestures, but through thoughtful consistency. And yet, reciprocity isn't just about action. It's also about emotional generosity. When you validate someone's struggle, they feel closer to you. When you make someone feel seen, they begin to trust you. When you give someone permission to be vulnerable, they often open more than you ever asked for. These emotional gifts often return tenfold, not through obligation, but through connection. Now, take trust and reciprocity together. Something magical happens. When someone trusts you, and then you give to them, they don't just feel grateful, they feel bonded. And bonds don't require selling. They don't require pitch decks or urgency tactics. Bonds create pull. Pull is stronger than push. Push says, "Here's why you should act." Pull says, "I trust you. I value you. I'm here." And the person leans in, not because they were persuaded, but because they were seen. This is how movements begin, not with force, but with resonance. Think of brands like Patagonia. They've built immense customer loyalty not through flashy advertising, but through values-driven consistency, ethical manufacturing, environmental activism, customer-first policies. Every choice says, "We care about what you care about." And the customers stay loyal, often for life. Now zoom back into your world. Whether you're leading a team, building a business, nurturing a community, or having an honest conversation, ask, am I building trust or trying to shortcut it? Am I giving sincerely or giving conditionally? Am I prioritizing long-term loyalty over short-term conversions? Because manipulation can win once, but trust wins forever. Let's go practical. How to build trust and reciprocity in any interaction. 1. Be transparent. When you're uncertain, say so. People trust honesty over forced certainty. 2. Be consistent. Show up the same way over time. Erratic presence breaks emotional safety. 3. Give without keeping score. Share value, insight, or kindness without expecting immediate return. 4. Honor their autonomy. Let people choose freely. The absence of pressure builds trust faster than any pitch. 5. Speak their values. Show you understand what matters to them, not to manipulate, but to connect. 6. Close the loop. Follow up. Say thank you. Deliver what you promised. Reliability is influence. Now ask yourself, who do you trust most? Likely, it's not the person who impressed you once. It's the one who showed up when it mattered. The one who gave without strings. The one who saw you consistently for who you are. Be that voice. Be that presence. And your influence will grow not as noise, but as gravity. And now, from the personal to the collective, we move into one of the deepest forces shaping human behavior: conformity and crowd psychology. Because even with trust and clarity, individuals often bend not to truth, but to what the group is doing. To master influence, we must understand why people follow the crowd, even when it leads them the wrong way. Crowds don't just follow, they pull. They create momentum, amplify emotion, and define what's normal. And for most people, the desire to belong outweighs the desire to be right. This is the power of conformity, a hidden force that steers human behavior far more than logic ever could. And when combined with trust, authority, and social proof, it becomes a tidal current of influence. Let's start with a truth that's uncomfortable for many. Most people would rather be wrong with a group than right alone. Not because they're weak, but because isolation is painful. Social rejection registers in the brain like physical pain. We are wired to avoid it. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated this beautifully and disturbingly. In his now famous conformity experiments, participants were placed in a room with a group of actors. They were all shown a series of lines and asked to identify which line matched the reference line. The correct answer was obvious, but when all the actors intentionally gave the wrong answer aloud, the real participant often conformed. Even when they knew the answer was wrong, they went along with the group. Why? Because standing out feels dangerous, embarrassing, lonely, and the subconscious whispers, "Just blend in." This instinct explains why people laugh at jokes they don't find funny, why they cheer in crowds even if they don't agree, why someone will remain silent when they witness something unjust, simply because no one else speaks up. This isn't about intelligence, it's about emotional safety. So, as someone seeking to influence, the question becomes, how do you shape the group narrative so that others willingly align? The answer lies in understanding the mechanics of group psychology. Groups create implicit rules about what's acceptable, what's praised, and what's punished. People quickly pick up on these cues. Is vulnerability celebrated here or dismissed? Is initiative rewarded or resented? Is questioning allowed or shut down? Once these patterns are absorbed, most people adjust their behavior accordingly. That's how culture is shaped. Not through official policy, but through perceived norms. And here's the twist. Those norms can be crafted. Influential leaders, marketers, and movements intentionally create environments where the desired behavior is framed as the standard. They don't say, "Be bold." They say, "Around here, we speak up." Subtle difference, massive effect. This is called normative framing, and it transforms abstract values into social expectations. Want people to take action? Don't just say, "You should." Say, "Most people like you already have." This is why phrases like, "Join thousands of others." Over 90% of users choose, "Smart parents everywhere are switching to," are so effective. They don't persuade directly, they normalize. And normalization is persuasion without pressure. Let's explore another angle. Mimicry. Humans unconsciously mimic the speech, posture, and facial expressions of those around them. This creates rapport, a sense of sameness, and sameness reduces threat. Ever notice how two close friends often speak with similar rhythms? Or how couples begin to mirror each other's gestures over time? This isn't coincidence. It's subconscious bonding. It says, "We belong." So, if you want to build fast trust, mirror subtly. Pace the other person's energy. Reflect their language style. When done authentically, this triggers the "like me" reflex, and people trust those who feel familiar. Let's bring this into larger contexts. Think of social movements. They don't begin with everyone agreeing. They begin with visible agreement. A few voices, a few brave actions, a few testimonials, and then momentum. The crowd doesn't need to believe first. They need to see others believing. Once that belief becomes public, on signs, on stages, in social media, it builds gravity. This is how trends explode. It's how bad ideas spread. It's how good ideas take root. And this is why visibility is everything in influence. You may have the best idea in the world, but if no one sees others embracing it, they hesitate. They wait for a cue. They wait for social permission. Give them that cue. Showcase real users. Share comments. Highlight actions others are taking. Build community around shared values. Make belief visible. People don't just buy a product. They buy the sense of belonging that comes with it. They don't just join an idea. They join the people who have already gathered around it. But here's the ethical fork in the road. Crowd psychology can lift or deceive. It can lead people to truth or to groupthink. It can liberate or manipulate. That's why influence at this level demands integrity. When using conformity, 1. Anchor it in truth. Don't fake popularity. Don't lie about numbers. Earn your crowd. 2. Highlight independent thinking. Paradoxically, framing a movement as those bold enough to question creates a new tribe of rebels, thinkers, leaders. 3. Show diversity of voices. If only one type of person believes in you, the reach shrinks. Broader representation expands safety. 4. Use community as a container for growth. Don't make the crowd the endpoint. Make it the starting place for transformation. Because ultimately, people want two things: to be themselves and to belong. The best influence offers both. You don't have to change to be here, but being here might just change you. Let's zoom out. So far, we've built influence through trust, consistency, scarcity, framing, and crowd energy. But the deepest layer remains. The quiet, hidden force that creates urgency not from outside, but from within. We're about to explore the final dimension of influence: identity. Because once someone believes that a choice reflects who they are, you don't have to convince them anymore. The decision becomes personal, and nothing is more persuasive than a person trying to stay true to themselves. At the deepest core of influence lies a single idea. People will do almost anything to stay consistent with who they believe they are. This is the psychology of identity-based influence, where persuasion doesn't feel like an external force, but an internal alignment. It's not, "you should do this." It's, "this is who you are." And once an action becomes a reflection of identity, it becomes nearly unshakable. Let's start with a simple truth. We don't just make decisions, we protect our self-image. Every belief, every habit, every declaration we make is a brick in the house of our identity. Take one away, and the whole structure feels threatened. This is why someone might refuse to change their mind, even when shown overwhelming evidence. Because to accept the new idea means abandoning part of themselves. And that's far scarier than being wrong. But this isn't stubbornness, it's self-preservation. So, if you want to influence deeply and ethically, don't attack identity. Speak to it, affirm it, then expand it. Let's bring this into practice. Imagine someone who sees themselves as a responsible parent. Instead of telling them, "You should buy this organic food for your child," say, "This is what caring parents choose to protect their kids." You've taken an action and aligned it with who they already believe they are. Now, taking the action feels natural, even necessary. That's the power of identity anchoring. Marketers, politicians, teachers, and leaders have long used this principle. But few do it consciously. Fewer still do it ethically. You don't need to change who someone is. You simply help them express more of who they already want to be. The mind is hungry for coherence. When someone identifies as healthy, they'll feel uncomfortable eating fast food. When they see themselves as generous, they'll be more likely to give. When they view themselves as a leader, they'll naturally step forward in group settings. Each behavior becomes a form of self-expression. This is how habits take root. Not through discipline alone, but through identity. You don't try to work out. You become the kind of person who never misses a workout. You don't try to wake up early. You become someone who values a strong morning. The action supports the identity, and the identity reinforces the action. It becomes a loop. So how do you use this in influence? Name the identity behind the action. Don't just say, take this step. Say, this is what someone who values growth would do. Affirm the shift. When someone takes a step, reflect it back. You showed up. That says something about you. Tell identity-based stories. Don't just highlight results. Highlight the transformation of self. He didn't just lose weight. He became the kind of man who keeps promises to himself. Build community around shared identity. People stay in tribes that reinforce how they see themselves. That's why CrossFit, Apple, and Harley-Davidson aren't just brands. They're badges. Let's go deeper. One of the most powerful psychological effects is cognitive dissonance. The discomfort we feel when our actions and identity don't align. If someone sees themselves as kind but behaves selfishly, they feel tension. If they see themselves as competent but fail publicly, they feel shame. This tension pushes people to resolve the inconsistency, either by changing the behavior or by justifying it. Now flip this for good. Help someone take a small, positive action. Then affirm their identity. Now any future behavior that contradicts that identity creates internal tension. And the path of least resistance is to stay aligned with the new self-image. This is why the first donation, the first vote, the first act of kindness matters so much. It's not the size. It's the shift in self-perception. In other words, the most powerful persuasion says not, here's what to do, but here's who you are. Let's bring this to a powerful example. Barack Obama's 2008 campaign. The core message wasn't just vote for me, it was yes, we can, a declaration of collective identity. It wasn't about policy, it was about possibility. And that possibility was reflected back to people as a mirror of their best self. People didn't vote just because of agreement. They voted because they believed something about themselves. I am the kind of person who believes in change. Now you might ask, what if someone's identity is limiting? What if they say, I'm not good at this, or I'm just not a leader? That's where influence becomes liberation. Your role is not to argue with that belief, but to create cracks in the identity where new growth can emerge. You do this through identity expansion. Instead of saying, you're wrong, say, maybe you haven't seen this part of yourself yet. Example, you say you're not confident, but showing up here today took courage. Maybe that's the beginning of something new. Suddenly, identity isn't static. It's elastic. It breathes. And that breath makes space for transformation. Because the greatest influencers don't just guide behavior, they guide becoming. They help people step into the version of themselves that already exists, hidden beneath doubt, buried beneath old stories, waiting for permission to emerge. And once that emergence begins, you don't need to push anymore. Because when someone believes, this is who I am now, they will act accordingly. They will protect that identity, defend it, and grow it. So remember, don't speak to the behavior, speak to the identity beneath it. Don't fight limiting beliefs, expand them. Don't just pitch transformation, reflect it. Don't offer instructions, offer alignment. Because at the end of the day, the most persuasive sentence is not you should, it's this is who you are becoming. And that brings us to the final chapters of this journey, where influence becomes legacy, where it's no longer about individual tactics, but about the systems, environments, and beliefs that keep influence alive long after you've spoken. We now step into the psychology of momentum, ritual, and long-term impact, where influence doesn't just land, it lasts. Influence is not a one-time event. It's a force over time. The most lasting influence isn't loud, it's layered. It's the rhythm that repeats until it becomes ritual, the presence that persists until it becomes trusted, the idea that echoes until it becomes identity. Welcome to the psychology of momentum and ritual, where change is sustained not through intensity, but through consistency. We often overestimate the power of the big moment, the viral speech, the emotional pitch, the game-changing breakthrough. But true influence isn't a spark. It's a fire that keeps burning. And that fire is fed by one thing: structured repetition. Let's begin with momentum. Momentum is not just movement, it's compounding movement. Each small action builds on the one before, and over time, that motion becomes self-sustaining. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik effect. Once a task is started, the brain is more likely to want to complete it. This is why starting small is so powerful. One tiny commitment leads to another. The action pulls the identity. The identity fuels the next action, and the cycle continues. Think of a flywheel. Heavy, slow at first. But once moving, it takes less energy to keep spinning. Your influence can work the same way. So how do you create momentum? Make the first action frictionless. Don't ask for transformation. Ask for motion. A yes, a sign-up, a question, a comment. Celebrate early movement. Acknowledge and reinforce it. You're already in motion. That's rare. That matters. Stack wins. Don't just move randomly. Move strategically, from easy to meaningful to identity shifting. Name the momentum. When people see their progress framed back to them, it creates emotional velocity. Now let's pair momentum with its secret ally, ritual. Rituals aren't just habits. They're sacred patterns. And the human brain loves patterns. It finds safety in rhythm, meaning in repetition, identity in ceremony. Religions have long used ritual to shape belief. So have military institutions, sports teams, successful brands, even families. Because when a behavior is repeated in a meaningful way, it's remembered not just intellectually, but emotionally. Let's take an example. Consider Apple's product launches. They don't just release a product. They create a ritualized moment, anticipation, a reveal, signature language. It's not marketing, it's choreography. And that choreography builds loyalty. Or think of Alcoholics Anonymous. Every meeting begins the same way. Introductions, ritual phrases, shared structure. These patterns create belonging, familiarity, and safety. In your world, whether you're leading a team, a movement, a brand, or a community, ask, what rhythms define us? Do people know what to expect? Do they anticipate the next step? Do they associate your presence with progress? If not, build rituals, weekly reflections, monthly themes, first 3 minutes of every call, signature phrases that reinforce values, shared actions that feel like us, not just me. The goal is not control, it's coherence. And coherence leads to retention. Because when people feel rhythm, they stay. They don't need constant novelty. They need meaningful repetition. Now let's take this deeper. The most powerful rituals create psychological closure and emotional renewal. They offer people a chance to recommit, to reconnect, to remember why they started. In influence, this is critical, because motivation fades, doubt creeps in, life gets busy. But a well-timed ritual pulls people back, not with pressure, but with presence. Here we are again. Let's remember who we are. Let's continue. This rhythm becomes a compass. Now, pair ritual with reflection, and you get evolution. A community that grows, a brand that adapts, a leader who listens. Because rituals are not static, they can evolve. The key is to preserve the intention, even as the form changes. And that intention is everything. Ask, what is the emotional goal of this rhythm? Is it to ground people? To inspire action? To build connection? To mark transition, design accordingly, with care, with meaning. Because here's the truth. Most people don't need new information. They need remembered commitment. And that remembering happens through rhythm. Now let's zoom out. If you want influence to last, you must design not just for impact, but for infrastructure. How does someone begin their journey with you? What rhythms guide their progress? What reminders keep them aligned? What stories reflect who they're becoming? This is architected influence, where every touch point, every email, every interaction builds towards something felt, not just heard. It's not about the flash, it's about the frame. You're creating a system of meaning, a living ecosystem of beliefs, behaviors, and shared momentum. And that system is what sustains influence. When the spotlight fades, when attention shifts, when challenges rise. Because in the end, people don't follow products, or speeches, or even people. They follow rhythms of meaning. They stay in places where they feel themselves becoming who they want to be. So as we prepare to close this journey, remember, create motion, anchor identity, sustain through ritual, guide with rhythm, reflect with story, and above all, design for belonging. Because when influence becomes a place where people belong, it doesn't fade. It compounds. It echoes. It grows even when you're not looking. And now, in our final section, we'll bring everything together. Not as a summary, but as a charge. A closing message on power, ethics, and the sacred responsibility of shaping minds and hearts. We will explore how to hold influence not as a weapon, but as a stewardship, a trust, a legacy. Influence is not a trick. It is not a shortcut. It is not a weapon to wield over others. It is a responsibility to carry with others. And now, at the closing threshold of this journey, we ask, what kind of influencer will you become? Not in title, not in vanity metrics, but in impact. Because every word you speak, every gesture you make, every space you shape, plants a seed in someone else's world. That seed may blossom into action or fester into resistance. It all depends on how you show up. This is the final dimension, legacy-based influence. Legacy-based influence is not about gaining followers. It's about leaving something behind in people that stays with them long after you've gone. Let's begin where all legacies do, with values. What do you stand for? If you stripped away the cleverness, the style, the strategies, what truth remains at the core of your voice? Is it justice, integrity, empowerment, freedom, growth? Name it, own it. Because influence without values is not leadership, it's seduction. And seduction fades, but when every decision is filtered through your values, your influence becomes trustworthy, predictable in its ethics, unshakable in its direction, and that trust is your legacy's foundation. Next, legacy-based influence recognizes a simple truth. You don't control outcomes. You guide energy. You can't force someone to change, but you can offer a mirror. You can clear the path. You can remove friction. You can amplify belief until belief becomes action. It's not about domination. It's about amplification. This means choosing presence over pressure. When you enter a room, do people feel the need to perform? Or do they feel invited to expand? When you speak, do you declare certainty? Or do you offer clarity that frees others to choose? This is where ego dissolves. Legacy isn't built by proving how much you know. It's built by revealing how much is possible in others. That requires restraint, patience, silence even. Because influence isn't just in what you say. It's in the space you hold. The mentor who doesn't interrupt. The leader who doesn't panic. The teacher who allows the student to struggle. The friend who simply sits beside pain. These are moments of power because they transmit permission. Permission to think, to feel, to choose. That's the rarest influence of all. The one that doesn't push or pull, but holds. Now let's talk about ethics. In a world where attention is monetized, where algorithms reward outrage, and where influence is often reduced to performance, the temptation is real. To exaggerate, to manipulate, to design scarcity that doesn't exist, to create personas that outshine truth. Don't, because even if you win the moment, you lose the thread. And over time, the weight of misalignment will collapse what you built. So choose truth, choose transparency, choose the slower, steadier path of earned influence. It's quieter, but it lasts. Let's explore the power of self-awareness. You are not immune to the forces you've learned. You are persuadable, prone to bias, susceptible to ego, but that doesn't weaken you. It grounds you. When you see your own patterns clearly, you influence with humility. You speak as a fellow traveler, not as a preacher from the mountaintop. You say, "I've been where you are. I still am sometimes." That voice lands because it's real. And here's what's beautiful. When you influence from a place of shared humanity, you don't just change minds, you heal hearts. Because most resistance isn't intellectual, it's emotional. It's fear, shame, grief, confusion, loneliness. If you want to influence deeply, you must see people, not just their objections, but their unmet needs beneath them. That's the bridge. So what kind of influencer do you want to be? The loudest or the most trusted? The most polished or the most felt? The one who wins fast or the one who lasts long? Because the impact you make is not in what you take, it's in what you leave. And here's what you can leave: a sentence that echoes in someone's mind 10 years from now, a moment of dignity that redefined their self-worth, a new pattern they pass on to their children, a pause before they lash out, a decision made from strength instead of fear. You may never know. But that's the beauty of real influence. It's not measured in applause. It's measured in alignment. So carry this work not with urgency, but with reverence. You've now seen the tools, the levers, the psychology. You've explored identity, urgency, framing, trust, ritual. Now you get to choose. How will you use this knowledge? Because influence is not neutral. It either liberates or enslaves, awakens or numbs, builds or breaks. But used with love, it awakens. Used with responsibility, it builds. And used with truth, it transforms. So speak, guide, lead. Not because you need to be heard, but because someone else needs to remember who they are. Let your influence be the mirror that shows them. Let your voice be the one they carry forward. And let your legacy be not what you said, but who they became because you dared to say it.